Welcome to a webinar that will be discussing two topics. The first, I'll start out with the unintended consequences of technological progress, inviting audience engagement as well. And then after about 30 minutes, we'll shift into the article of about 2 weeks ago on ending violence and restoring a civil society. But starting out with topic number one, we've certainly seen, and I reflect on it in the editorial, rapid advances in technology and technological progress. I mean, it's been going on for centuries, but we've certainly seen rapid advances in the last 50, 100 years. Some say as a byproduct of the amount of money nations are spending on research, and the fact that we have global competition now at an international level. And so the public sector finances in order to create jobs, in order to develop their economy. But what ends up happening is you get into something like the internal combustion engine, contraception, uh, new materials like plastics, advances in energy. And all of it's very exciting with extraordinary offers in the short term, but the long-term consequences on the environment, on the ocean, on the climate, on parenting, on the structure and nature of the family. All of these institutional structures and things that we highly value seem to be paying a price. And the excitement that an immediate technology offers, we don't seem to be very good, or public sector doesn't seem to be particularly good in anticipating, therefore regulating. And of course, the more immediate one is AI and whether AI will have the benefits long-term that we cite, or whether we're entering into a cycle where we may live to regret over the coming years, not just job displacement, but whether or not mankind is in jeopardy. We've discussed most of these topics at one point or another, but I'd like to focus the discussion on not just my perspectives as reflected in the editorial, but your own. So I'd like to see if the audience has got something they'd wish to share, either echoing my sentiment or maybe muting it and tempering that the glass is half empty, whereas we'll focus on the short term and it's half full. So anyone want to share their perspectives right off the bat?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not picking on any one particular thing, but just sort of in general. AI has been around to the general public right now for almost 2 years, although it's been known about and worked upon for probably since the 1950s. I think we've been inundated with a lot of access to AI for free, and people have been wondering what they can do with it and not thinking of where it's going. The generative AI, particularly, um, I've just recently looking at a couple of newspaper articles, things like Alberta saying, we're perfect home for data centers and AI, but batteries not included. Bring your own power. Power demand is going to be a big issue. It's getting bigger all the time, and the queries that we make right now, the the general queries that people would make on AI really use an awful lot of power compared to just a simple Google search. Um, Moving a little bit more to the hard facts about power, I've looked at newsletters like Accelerate Hydrogen, for example, where there's a lot of movement on where power is going to come from down the road. There's discussions about um, putting wind turbines in to essentially create hydrogen from seawater, build ammonia plants to convert it to ammonia with nitrogen and use that to ship. We know that's a safer way to ship it, but if we look at it from beginning to end, the overall efficiency of that process is pretty small. And people on the East Coast anyway, in the US and in Canada, are starting to talk about the concerns they have for ammonia plants in their backyard. Um, the um, the story that comes out in the Accelerate Hydrogen newsletter is sort of twofold. The first part of it really talks about all of the advances and the investment and so on in that technology. And the second part of that newsletter talks about all of the similar projects that have been shut down or funds withdrawn for a while.
Okay, and in the realm of power, I mean, we certainly have seen the implications of nuclear, the early adoption and some of the meltdowns that occurred, whether it be in Europe or 3 Mile Island. So that's another example. And windmills and the killing of birds and that are in migration. So yeah, technology in the power sector. You mentioned AI, and we've talked at some length about AI and the ramifications for job losses and maybe the diminishing of the relevance of mankind as well. What about other technologies, Dawn? In the socio-demographic world, I mean, women in technology, there's contraceptive, reproductive health. We've certainly seen the implications on elevating the relevance of women in the workforce as they now could make decisions around childbirth, which that wasn't the case in the past. Anything you want to add in that realm?
What I wanted to add something a bit more general, and I think about technological progress. I think about improvement. Is this new development contributing to improvement or not? And I always think about improvements being, are we, saving time or money? Are we becoming more efficient, more effective? Is this beneficial when we think about the triple bottom line, like the social, economic, environmental? And so I think that quite often that innovations don't necessarily, or changes don't necessarily contribute to improvement. And so we have to be really, really careful with that. What we know in the whole world of quality with regards to making changes, and this includes, new technology and innovations and so forth, creative ideas, is that 50% of the time it makes no difference at all. And 25% of the time it indeed is more beneficial. And 25% of the time it takes you in the opposite direction. So just on that alone, I think you have to be really, really careful with that and closely study these things so you know what's happening. And I think about negative consequences, let's say a push on so-called clean energy, solar panels and wind turbines and so forth. I mean, look what happened to Germany. That was more of a political narrative, I think. And I don't know that that's well founded in terms of putting a push on that. And look at the consequences that Germany is suffering as a result. And so I think we have to really study these things closely and make our decisions accordingly.
I mean, right off the cuff, people immediately cite economic implications. Is there going to be profit? Are there going to be more jobs? Is GDP going to go up? But often the consequences are not economic. The unintended consequences are often social. That's why I mentioned the family and contraceptive, but you've got a whole array of social issues. I mean, take aging. The advances in the realm of public health and the advances in medicine have allowed the increase in aging. And now we have diseases that are prevalent that were not prevalent 50 years ago, dementia being one of them, a byproduct of increased aging. And whether or not the society has the capability, the welfare state in particular, to sustain the cost of an aging population. And that leads people like Elon Musk and Gates to promote depopulation through World Economic Forum, through a whole array of measures. But it seems to me what we undervalued was environment, and we're seeing that around the topic of climate change, and we didn't value the relevance of our social structures. Often saying, well, they'll adapt. They'll adapt to technology. That's what the engineers used to tell me is, I'm not going to worry about it because mankind is very adaptive, and no matter what the technology does, its benefits are going to outweigh the social impacts, which may be negative. Anyone else want to jump in on any other technologies? Keith, you've looked at the realm within the field of agriculture, and whether it be genetic modifications of food and whether or not in the short term that's good, or the long term, do we really know what's going to happen? And you want to add anything in that realm?
Well, I am a little bit involved with some AI. I sit on an advisory to the board of a clinical personal health platform linked to ChatGPT, which aids into diagnosis for pre and post um, clinical um, treatments for humans, but it kind of links everything together on an algorithm basis, both from diseases to behavioral patterns. And the whole idea there is to assist doctors and patients to get better diagnosis for anything that's out there that can increase their personal health. They're getting ready to launch that on a commercial basis next year. And they've been doing it for a couple of years. I've been at it, an advisor to their board for since they started. I can tell you they're getting scads of money put at them. I think that in this particular case with AI, it aids and benefits a discerning end user, which is the human being, to try to figure out how can they get better treatment, better diagnosis for their health, all this kind of stuff. But on the contrast, there are certain AI things that, like, I spent half my time in Asia, 6 months in Asia, 6 months in Vancouver. And in Asia, like, when I say Asia, I have an office in Singapore, an office in Sydney, Australia, more so in places like Hong Kong and China and all these places. Like, if you go and look at the restaurant sector, like, there are no service people in the restaurant sectors there, unless you're at a high-end Michelin place. But for 90% of the transactions that are involved, you're actually coming up with a QR code and actually just pressing a button or showing your screen, both from a choice and a choice for what you want and a payment choice. So you've completely eliminated, again, I'm just talking about the service sector, you've eliminated a whole bunch of people in between your food experience.
Yeah, I
So
mean, that's one of the downsides is they have cited that the retail and food industry, that is the serving, is the one probably among the most vulnerable to the
yeah,
emergence.
so from that perspective, like I see the benefits from a medical standpoint, because that's going to help the human race. They're not, but also what, from other sectors we're talking about, it will eliminate, part of the supply chain to the end user, whether that's distribution, customer service, fulfillment, all that kind of stuff. So you're absolutely right from that, perspective, is that what impact is that going to have on the labor pool of job creation or job stability?
Well, in the health sector, I mean, you made the point of the benefit, maybe reducing pain or reducing disease, but almost many of them, of course, affect aging. And people don't die, or the death rate, or whether it's children and infant mortality. I mean, technologies have helped in that realm as well. And now we have a population on the earth that may be contributing to, sorry, Tommy, may be contributing to overconsumption. And we talked earlier before the webinar started, even about the amount of garbage that we produce in our society today. As a product of the gains that we now have in being able to produce things on a mass level, thank you technology, whether it be in agriculture or just in manufacturing. All of these technologies, you think of CRISPR and gene modification and what it may mean in terms of the human race or otherwise in terms of genetically modified food. But is anybody really talking about the downside and giving adequate authority to some body that could regulate, it's called guardrails, I guess, of regulate these technologies so that the socioeconomic implications are in the interests of mankind in the long term, and not just thinking short term. Think about data. We've talked often about data and capitalism, and data typically being used to increase commercial interests and profits. But we also know that increased access to data erodes privacy. But in this balancing act between, for example, privacy and increased gains that the seller knows you better than you know yourself, therefore they can help you in making your choices. That regulator has one heck of a role in trying to balance these interests today. And when technology moves as fast as it does, they're very slow in getting to the into the market and making the regulations that will be of value. Clayton, anything you want to add here? I know you're muted. If you want to add anything, let's unmute for just a bit there. Yeah, go ahead. Look like you might have you might be itching to share with us a view you might have.
Well, it's just more of a general comment, and that is, talking to the consequences of technology and stuff. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think that to me, that's the underlying thing. And we've got people that are out developing things just because they're very smart and they know they can do it, but is it really good in the end, right? And the other thing I just worry about a lot, especially with AI, is we're going to let machines do a lot of our thinking for us. And, some of us, yeah, we're going to use it and we're going to progress humanity. But I think there's going to be a large portion of the human race who is just going to start leaning on machines to give them all their information. We're going to forget how to source things. We're going to trust what's coming across our screens, without a doubt. And I don't know that that's going to be good for us, in the future. I just have reservations, I guess. And
You've made a really good point and a good quote there, and I'll be to Shirley in just a second when you say just because we can doesn't mean we should. But we're in a world where technology is serving markets. And markets don't seem to have a long-term perspective, and boards don't have a long-term perspective. They're after immediate profit. We have this voracious appetite to win today and to forget about tomorrow. And that's where government or public sector regulators are supposed to play a role in order to mediate the excesses of the market. But the market wants profits, and the market wants satisfaction today. Government seems to be failing in its role as it relates to its capacity to manage the long-term implications of technologies, which may have negative socioeconomic implications. I think about plastics. My dad was in the plastics industry in the very early days, and he was proud of the flexibility and the capability of plastics to serve so many roles. But today we know that plastics are in the ocean. They're probably in the food chain. And there are serious concerns about plastic, and yet it had so many immediate benefits. Plastic plays a role in almost every aspect of our economy. And yet today we learn, almost 100 years after, I think his work was in the 1920s and early 30s, we're talking, it took 60 years to really begin to understand how prevalent and how it didn't break down, how the environment couldn't break down plastic. So I'm not sure today what you really are going to be able to do about it, because our reliance and the value that plastic plays in so many aspects of our lives, although they're getting rid of plastic straws, maybe that's the beginning. Shirley, what do you have to share?
Yeah, I've been watching that story associated with the development of the atomic bomb
Oh yeah.
way back in the 40s. And there was a company that was in St. Louis that processed the uranium that was used for that bomb. And they dumped it in one site, and then they moved it from that site to the dump later. Now, there's many people now that have developed a lot of cancers and ailments associated with this radioactivity from that. And there in that dump, there's a fire that has been ongoing for many years. And that fire has not yet reached that radioactive material. But this is 80 years and they haven't cleaned it up. And the government has been downplaying it. And like this is many years and yet to come. When you don't know what you're doing with some of this technology, what are the long-term implications? And they don't know that. I asked the question about this carbon capture and what the long-term implications of that are. and they don't know, and it forms an acid. So what happens if that comes up someplace else? And there's many examples of this in terms of, even developing the COVID vaccine. A lot of people have serious health issues because of using it, because it wasn't entirely proven. It was developed in a rush. So we don't do a good job in assessing long-term implications.
Well, you're reinforcing a point that seems to apply to almost all technologies, and we turn to the regulator, but the regulator typically has national regulatory, and most of these technologies have global ramifications. We don't have an international body other than agreements, and we did have an agreement regarding nuclear proliferation, which almost serves as a model. But we're having a hell of a lot of time handling the climate change, and we'll talk about that next week with Lee, of Canada may serve as the poster boy in terms of carbon taxes and whatever, but where's China? Where is other countries that are in fact considerable emitters? Where's the regulatory body that will take into consideration what we're talking about here? And does it happen even in our schools? When you think about engineers, do engineers have courses in ethics? Is thou shalt do no harm a fundamental tenet that a engineer must in fact salute in order to make sure that as they emerge and that they take into consideration the socioeconomic implications? There are regulations around construction, but do doctors take courses in ethics? Are those that are advancing technology, are scientists mandated to take courses in ethics? Einstein, Oppenheimer, many others were very concerned in the early stages of nuclear of what the ultimate ramifications of nuclear were. They weren't going to stop it. Technology takes on a life of its own, and it seems to overwhelm our countries. And I'm not pointing to any one country. I'm pointing to the dilemma we have as mankind in managing the evolution of knowledge that's associated with technology and what its socio-economic implications are in humanity. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I'm just going to pile on to what Clayton said and go back and what you're talking about the cognitive decline. If you think about technologies, the technologies were, the narrative in the last 30 years about our technology's advancement, especially with our devices, it's supposed to bring us closer together, but it's actually doing the exact opposite. Ask yourself, do you control your devices, or do your devices control you? Can you turn off your tablet, your phone for any period of time? Everybody's walking around like a freaking zombie. So you talk about cognitive decline. I talk to my kids, and when I talk to them about the rotary phone and the analog television dial, they have no comprehension because they're walking around with a friggin' handheld phone that can do more than all of the space shuttles, rockets that have gone into Earth. And so the point that we're worried about with AI, we still don't have oversight and regulatory bodies that cover basic internet protocol on an international scale or an oversight scale. And AI, they're warning us all the time, well, we need to get this, we need to get that, because they do need to get that, but we still haven't even figured out how to stop all the bullshit that's going on with our current devices.
Well, I mean, we have just now begun to see schools starting to regulate the cell phone in the classroom, which they were very reluctant to do because parents were complaining. They wanted to remain in touch with their kids even while they're at school. But one way or another, the schools, as a regulator or as a parent equivalent during the hours that the child is in school, are starting to say enough is enough. And that's just one example of the many, many that we've talked about. It does appear that as we advance and progress as a society, we are increasingly adding more and more risk with more and more technologies and more dependency that leads to, I mean, you use the phrase cognitive decline. I don't know whether or not that is global, whether or not we have a reduction in intelligence in our society. We certainly have a reduction in adaptation. We may be adapting to new technologies, but do we really have the skills anymore that if we don't have electricity, if it somehow is over for a few days, what the hell do people do? Do they know how to light a fire without a match?
Birth rate goes up.
Go ahead, Tom. What do you got there? Birth rate goes up.
That's what happened in New York when they had a,
Yeah.
and of course in the Blitz, evidently the birth rate went up as well. But I feel fearful.
You feel what?
I feel fearful
Okay.
about this AI business, and I keep thinking, and I've got kids and grandkids and whatnot all coming up through the system, and they're all bright and they're going to do really well. But like say you get to a point where you're doing your master's or your PhD, and you say, okay, I want to attack this problem here on this aspect of human physiology. What should I do? And so you punch it in, and AI says, oh, there's 50 PhDs in California doing just exactly that. And Japan, they've got 100 doing that and everything like that. And you come back to it and you think, my God, where is the creative process going to go? Is it going to hit a deadlock? And that's what they're talking about. I've been reading today is that they're all worried about a deadlock happening.
Okay, well, let me pivot just for a minute. We've spent the last 25 minutes or so talking about and reinforcing among one another that there's risk.
Yeah.
That there's risk that isn't being regulated. But we've spent very little time talking about what can be done about it. And so as we wrap up, I'm going to ask each of you just to give some thought, either say you don't know or you do and you have an idea. What can be done in order to ensure that as technology evolves, whether it be AI, whether it be in the health realm, whether it be in agriculture, what can we do as a society to ensure that the socioeconomic implications of technologies are taken into consideration long-term as technology evolves? So I'm going to start with you, Randall, but please be brief if you would. What can we do about it?
Yeah, thank you. I knew that was coming, and I'm not that well prepared because while we're talking here, I'm asking ChatGPT on my other screen to create an impact assessment methodology to cover social, economic, political, technological, cultural, and environmental impacts. But
Okay.
it turns out that there's an exponential growth of these. And as our society becomes increasingly more complex, it becomes less possible to actually predict anything in the future. The interaction effects of everything just makes the possibilities explode, and the uncertainty is just taking off. So
You're reinforcing the fearful, but what can we do about it?
yeah, the only thing I can think of, and I'm working on it diligently, is to try to adopt a systems worldview. And hopefully, there's a fractal algorithm underneath all of this cosmos that we can, once we understand it, we'll be able to better understand all of the complex manifestations of our world.
Okay, Lee, I'll call on you next. I'm just going across the screen as you're ready. Lee, do you have something that you could cite uh, in order to regulate the long-term implications?
I don't think it needs to be regulated.
Mhm.
I started out in the computer industry when I was 26 years old. The very first computer system I sold was to basically replace a couple of people. I had developed a parts inventory system for heavy duty trucks. The parts manager was dead set that I shouldn't bring this computer system into his business. He changed his mind after about 6 months, but he fought me tooth and nail. The owner of the truck company basically told him it's coming. You deal with it.
Okay, so am I to interpret that you have faith that man will adapt to consequences that they haven't anticipated as technology evolves in general?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, Tommy.
I got to thinking about effects of technology and unintended consequences. And I got to thinking about the invention of the printing press and how the Catholic Church thought that was great because it allowed the spread of Bibles. And what did it probably really do? It probably meant the demise of the Catholic Church, at least as far as encouraging the Protestant religion and I think the more we know, the less we are willing to believe in a religion that's sort of like, what would I say, as artificial as it seems today, in terms of belief in totally hypothetical things that I don't know, don't really make sense.
So what do we do about it? What can we
But
do?
what now to me, I don't know. It has to come back. As Lee suggested, I don't know if you can regulate it.
Mhm.
Um, I got to thinking about the world financial system, and it's supposedly well regulated. Yet we have all kinds of money being spent by underground, the various means spent to support drug trafficking, terrorism all over the globe, and all the regulations we have aren't doing anything to solve that. As long as you have people, as long as you have so much information around, you don't need to have a comparable and better system of education from the very beginning, because to provide information to people who don't understand anything is just what's leading to chaos.
Okay,
If
so
you don't understand, the information gets misused, misinterpreted, and then deliberately misused, and so on you go. Our school system, I think, is a terrible shape.
okay, but
How little regard we have for it.
I'm going to interrupt because I want to keep on moving. But you've introduced the relevance of education and awareness,
Yes.
implying that the discussions like this are relevant because they should elevate the understanding of the importance of anticipating and of trying to mitigate the downside. So go ahead, Keith. I'll ask you now. What do you think could be done?
Well, we're at the infancy of this industry, and just like Tommy said, you've got financial markets, you've got medical markets, you've got industry markets, and all these markets are set up so that they have an oversight or regulatory body. Those are boundaries and guidelines that and you're always going to have, the bad element, the criminal element, all this kind of stuff. Like with carbon credits in Australia, I sit on the New South Wales task force at legislation, and we're gathering all the intel so that we carbon credits is like crypto. We don't know what the heck it is, so we're trying to get our head around it with really smart people, so that if this is going to be an industry, we can regulate it for everybody, so it's a level playing field. And I think they got to do that with AI, the same thing. And it's probably going to create more jobs on the regulatory body side with that activity. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. Mel, that was very helpful, Keith. Go ahead, Mel. What would you suggest be done?
Well, maybe a little bit of preamble like everyone else. I think similar beliefs tend to attract people with common views and common goals. The different views and understandings of the same thing are quite common amongst people. And, not to kind of put people in pigeonholes or anything like that, but there are some aspects of technology that are far beyond what a lot of people can understand. And they don't have to understand it, but they have to understand what benefit it would give them. It's, I guess, like hiring a consultant, and a consultant comes back with a report, but not having anybody at the company or whatever who can understand what that consultant is saying and see the benefits for it. How can we change things? I think in one way, as Tommy alluded to there, education. I think that's the big thing. We don't want to align everybody so everybody marches to the same drum necessarily. We need the diversity and all that, but we need some common understanding of the benefits of this thing in the long term on a specific basis, but also on a very, very high level general basis. It's not an easy thing to do. We'll have to live through it. And
Okay, for several reasons. One is speed, and two is the breadth,
yes,
depth of some of the implications. Go ahead, Dawn. I'm going to call on you next, then I'm going to call on Yogi.
Okay, I think we've always got to ask ourselves that question, does this result in improvement? But I'm really reflecting on something that I was watching earlier today, and it was an interview with Ken Drysdale. And this guy's in Manitoba. He's one of the most engaged citizens I've ever seen or met. And he's busy working on Manitoba together. And he's busy rolling up his sleeves and he's going around the province educating people about government, the three levels of government, what their roles and responsibilities are, and informing them about things that are going on. And in this interview, he was talking about the smart city update and really realizing that neither the citizens nor the political representatives are completely aware of what they're doing.
Okay, so I mean, you haven't
Quite
used,
something.
but you are talking about leadership.
Oh, yeah. And I was reflecting back on the work we did with municipalities, that research.
Yeah.
And I was really gobsmacked as I'm listening to this interview. And if anyone wants to see it, it's on with Shadow Davis and Ken Drysdale. And they were just having a great conversation about the whole smart city initiative and how when they've been talking to the public, nobody has any idea about any of this or what's going on. And surprisingly enough, the political representatives, the city councilors and so forth, don't really have a good idea either. They don't know what's even in some of these planning documents. And I was quite shocked by that. But it seems to me that everybody's really just so overwhelmed with information and they're kind of paying attention to what's going on in their own little space. But some of these bigger picture items that ultimately affect all of us are sweeping by in our ignorance.
And especially with that point, I mean, with some of these technologies, you take nuclear, for example. We were just having a discussion before this webinar on thorium and nuclear, but thorium as a technology, if you will, could be used as a nuclear fuel, but unlike deuterium and tritium, it can in fact be used for military purposes. That's a byproduct. And if the politician who is viewed to be a regulator doesn't have access to that knowledge, they may make a decision with long-term ramifications. So our politicians need to either have access or themselves become more knowledgeable about the relevance. But I think the point you've made, that they need to know that this is an issue. And it may be, and I was going to cite this in the wrap up, this may be a unifying issue. The rate at which technology is hitting us and the socioeconomic implications and how profound they are may mean that this one topic could be an international policy issue that could bring all parties together like climate change has. Okay, Yogi, what do you have to add?
Well, when we look back at history, every significant technology advance was accompanied by those who are concerned about the risks. And that's fair enough. And in the end, we adopted every one of those advances in technology. So can you make the case that this advance is somehow bigger, more dangerous than the previous ones? And in some ways, I think we can. However, we keep coming back to the nuclear advance and its potential to literally wipe out mankind. We have somehow to date managed to avoid that. Now, has that been by good luck? Because all of what we've said about how uninformed everybody or most people are, like Dawn is saying, and that includes politicians. And we've maybe reached the point where our technology has advanced to the point where you can't be informed about all of these things, even if you make a serious effort. So at the moment, I'm in the end still optimistic that we're going to muddle through somehow because we have in every instance of the past.
Okay,
Now,
so
some people may roll their eyes and say that's naive, but
well, on that particular point, I mean, it is comforting that humanity is optimistic about its future and the likelihood of human beings just being human beings to defer using atomic weapons. And we hope that Putin understands that. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Yogi was making a comment about the technologies and are they any greater than what we've experienced? When you think about the internet and the impact the internet has had, and then cellular technologies and the impact that that has had on the world. And then all of the stuff that's happened online, these different technologies and everything. It's amazing what has happened. So when we look back at this 10 years from now, are we going to see a world that really has just adopted another technology without too much problem?
Okay, Clayton, you're almost going to get the last word. I'm going to call in Shirley, and then I'll do a quick wrap up before we get to the next topic. Go ahead, Clayton.
Just a couple of quick comments. So one, mankind has adopted a lot of technologies that we were afraid of, and it's done wonderful things, but I think we also accepted the consequences. I think we just let that, we learned to live with things and we've forgotten what some of the consequences are.
Yeah.
Adapt.
Yeah, so we'll adapt, yeah. The other thing I was just going to say, the original question is, what can we do about it? So many of these things are set up to defy regulation. The general public, I think, is going to have a hard time doing much about it. In some cases, we're just going to have to accept that the people who put this together kind of knew what they were doing, I guess.
Well, we are certainly testing the capacity of our institutions called government to regulate the excesses, whether it is in climate change, whether it's the plastics in the ocean, whether it's CRISPR, whether it's AI that's coming. There seems to be something going on that it was one thing to say that the Catholic Church wasn't able to manage the printing press. We've got so many things going on simultaneously that the volume, the sheer volume, much less the rate of change, may well overwhelm the very institutions that we hoped were going to be able, that we had faith in, that they would be able to mitigate the extremes, AI being the more recent example. Okay, Shirley, what do you have to share with us?
All I can say is that we have to, maybe it's not the government, maybe there needs to be more regulation within the industry itself before they release things too early. They need to investigate more thoroughly the long-term consequences of whatever technology is being developed. And yes, everybody thinks money, 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 let's get to market first, but it's not just about that. There can be serious harm to society.
That's a very good point, because there is no overwhelming technology governor other than industry itself. And any industry probably has representations across national boundaries on a global scale. And to ask industry to self-regulate makes a lot of sense theoretically or hypothetically, but whether or not industries are well enough integrated to recognize AI being the best example of all, and the technology of AI is so immediately available that no single company can say, well, we're the leader, we will do it. So it seems to me that we don't have a instrument to regulate all industries on a global scale, as we tried to do with nuclear by having international agreements and having bodies like the United Nations or courts that were international in nature. This may be just exactly what bodies like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations say. This is what they were put in place for. After World War II, when Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt agreed that war was dangerous and world wars were more dangerous, and then as nuclear emerged, we needed international bodies that had the authority and the sign-ons and the signatories of hundreds of countries would regulate the emergence on the downside of technologies. It seems to me we've had some examples in nuclear, and I suspect we're going to see similar examples in AI, where we see Europe moving ahead. And Europe has traditionally been more sensitive to the social ramifications of technologies than North America, which has had more faith in technology itself. So we've heard that it can't be done. We've heard that it's unnecessary. We've heard that it should be stopped. We should heard it be slowed down. We are recognizing that the instruments other than education itself right now don't appear to be adequate. And our confidence, our faith in technology itself seems to be shaky. So I'm going to leave it at that and ask if you'll bear with me as we make a transition into another topic, And I know we used up almost 40 minutes on that last one. But that second topic is ending violence and restoring a civil society. And it calls for a bit of pivoting away from technology into mankind affecting mankind. The violence we refer to here is when mankind perpetrates discomfort or hurtfulness among its counterparts. And the wish that we could only calm down and restore a society where people in that society are driven to make sure that we're neighborly. So we certainly are living in North America in the sense, at least the media portrays this, that we live in violent or at least chaotic times. I, at my age, witnessed in the 60s the assassination of Kennedy, the subsequent assassination of King, the assassination of Kennedy's brother, the riots in Watts and Detroit. Nothing like that exists today. Although I saw a statistic yesterday when I was down in the US that 3,400 people have died of terrorism. 3,400, can you believe it? But you know how many have died in the United States from gun violence? 900,000 in that same period. And yet we regulate terrorism, but we are having a hell of a time regulating gun violence. So we seem to be having a dilemma in society. And I'm not just citing the US, I think we've got some of this in Canada as well, and worldwide, where the chaos, the arguments, the wish to resolve so often leads to the resolution of violence. Maybe the tools of violence are too readily at hand. Maybe the media, being global in nature, we can ignite fires on a much broader scale. But I'll tell you, the violence was pretty raw back in the 60s and 70s. It's hard. But now we've got Ukraine, we've got Israel, we've got Hamas, we've got Houthi, we've got Hezbollah, we've got Iran. Let's weigh into this. What are we living in a more violent society? Do we have examples of it you'd like to cite? And what could we do or what can we do so that we calm down and begin to function on a more neighborly, more civil basis? Anyone want to jump in and take it from there?
Yeah, I think that
I have lots of conversations on this topic on our Friday dinners together, but I'll let anybody take first shot at it. Go ahead, Keith.
yeah, like I had a home in California for a long time. We had a family home there for 20 years. So, and I worked out of Orange County, Yerba Linda, and I'm really a nobody. And I've had a gun pointed at me twice in the United States.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's twice. I'm not a violent person. I'm not somebody who wants to attract attention or anything like that. And on the contrast, just let me just get the dates here. 6 months ago, I was on my way to Westfield Mall in Australia, where a guy came down from northern Queensland and cut up 6 or 7 women. It was a mass terrorist attack, and he used a knife. Mm-hmm. So you've got the couple things that surface here for me is the socioeconomic group or the foundation of where we come from, the sense of family, unity, community that we come from, or what we're apart from, can drive the human psyche. I mean, Jordan Peterson says it in his book. He says there's an intersection in the human mind where we can be the most loving human beings on the world, and we can also be the most heinous human beings on the world. And I just think that, to break up Canada and the United States, if we had more guns in Canada, we'd probably be just like the United States. There's 400 million guns in the USA. Mm-hmm. And so you cite whatever that number was with the handguns.
900,000.
Yeah, it is, I think it's ever as violent as it's ever been, but, humans will they never cease to amaze me if they find tools, whether it's a knife, a car to run you down at a parade or an event, or having a gun and getting in a conflict.
Well, I mean, there certainly have been movements to try and eradicate guns. Maybe the AK-20 whatevers that are semi-automatics. A discussion I had this past week, a woman who has guns in her home, and I asked her why, and she said, "Well, I have shotguns. It's a hunting rifle. It's not a rifle that one would use to take out another person, although a shotgun will do a pretty good job of it. But it's not an automatic weapon that can fire multiple shots with a finger pull." Some say, well, we just need to do a better job in checking those that will hold these weapons. So they're not citing the weapon as the problem, they're citing the person who shoots the weapon as the problem. And we need to do a better job in regulating the purchasing of these weapons so that people like that Crooks in the US who shot up the school and got his weapons from his parents doesn't get a weapon because he's got some mental health issues. Randall, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think that morality is really at the root of this. We tend to empathize with people who are similar to ourselves, and the people we don't identify with are outsiders, and we have a moral code for us who are similar and a different moral code for those who are different from us. This divides us, and I think what I would want to do is to form, I'm trying to be practical as well, that is, form a multicultural elders group of people who have intimate knowledge of their own cultures and who can talk about human nature as a common underlying concept in all these different cultures. How do we define our common humanity across cultures so that we don't see each other as different but as similar? And then the moral empathy can then convey a sense of moral code. We're all in this together.
Empathy is not something that you see on the sports field. Winning is everything. And is it conceivable, and I alluded this, I think, in the article, that winning has become such a driver, whether it be in an argument or whether it be at a political level, that empathy isn't being exercised. What's being exercised is I win, you lose. It's not win-win. If Greg McGilvery were here, he'd be talking about collaboration. But I mean, to collaborate and to compromise, I'm not sure I'm hearing that any longer.
Well, competition is natural as well, but it can be
not to this extreme of engaging in violence in order to win.
Well, it's part of the cancel culture too, right? I don't agree with you, therefore I cancel you. That's a kind of violence that follows that same code that you're an outsider, I can't let you into my world.
So when you have a balance, you have something higher than winning. You have a country, a nation, you have peace, you have compromise as a byproduct. It seems to me that we are tossing away or throwing away the relevance and the value of compromising, the value and the relevance of empathy, the value and the relevance of neighbor and caring. Winning is everything. Getting onto the tribe that is the biggest, the best. USA, USA, USA. It's embarrassing, and it's offensive to some. Go ahead, Lee. You want to throw anything in here? I'm going to go around the table and ask each of you for a comment. Lee, you want to add anything? Okay, Tommy.
Winning. I think a lot of people vote because they want to be on the winning team, as opposed to voting on the basis of principle or anything else. So yeah, winning is a real problem, certainly when it comes to elections. And I guess that's one reason why I'd also feel that the problem with that sort of an attitude toward elections, you end up essentially having essentially alternate dictatorships, from one party wins or the other party wins, and there's no sort of balance possible with that sort of an attitude. Why we need to reform our voting system.
Well, and as the work up to an election, the usage of hate and fear, personalization rather than policy discussion, seems to be rampant. With a declaration by one of the parties anyway, and you know where I'm talking about, saying, I will not accept the results unless it's fair, and it's only fair if I win because I never lose. And I'm prepared to exercise, or that party is prepared to exercise, the taking down essentially of democracy, saying you will never have to vote again. That seems to me in demonizing your opponent. Even in boxing, there are rules and there's a referee. In sports, there is a referee in order to mitigate violence where there's a penalty. But when it's happening in government, I'm not sure how one goes about saying, where's the fair play? Unless you say the democracy, no holds barred, the election, and the public will make the ultimate decision. They are the referee. Keith, you want to add something here?
I want to go back to what we talked about when we talked about guns, and you talked about there's mental instability. But
Yes.
like Tim Walsh said the other night on the VP debate, he says sometimes it's just the guns,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Sometimes it's just the guns. The other thing that, to your point here on this political rhetoric, you know, I'm a father and I have a duty to be a leader in my family, especially for my kids who are going to succeed in whatever I do, whether it's moral compass, whether it's financial, whether it's being a good community person. So it does matter. Words do matter. So when you get stuff that's said by Trump, I'll say his name, you get words said by Trump, that those words matter. And when I have to explain to other people, my daughter or my son, how he can say these words, and there are still 75 or 73 million people that will vote for him. So I think it's gotten a little out of hand here. We're not, you know, there's only a few people that will talk like that, but I'm not going to talk among my peers and call them down and call them out and call names like that. And I think we've lost that in society.
I mean, for those that I have asked about what is it, the 73 million people, I thought it was 50, but whatever the number is, it's in the millions. Why is it they're not hearing and reacting to hateful language as others are? And I hear a couple of things. I hear, well, he's a clown, he's entertaining. He says things that he really doesn't mean, and we'll hear differently tomorrow, and he'll never apologize. And he will say, I'm never wrong. But the people will excuse his behavior as, well, that's just politics. Mel, you want to add anything here? And the others are the rabid Republicans that say, no matter what, I hate the Democrats so badly that I'll accept anything. You know, no Democrat in my backyard. Mel, you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I can't write fast enough to keep track of all the good ideas that are coming out here, but I tend to, I'll echo Tommy's comment about winning. Voting in elections and so on, no matter where, seems to be like we're voting for the president of the Students' Union, for example. The color is the thing that matters, you know. But on the messaging, sometimes, you know, we've had a certain message we want to give to people, and you'll give that message to one person delivering it using one word or one set of words versus another person, you have to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but you have to say it in a different way. So they both understand the same message in the way that they can. And that level of understanding is different on everybody's part. So it's a difficult thing to do. You can't say one thing and everybody understands it the same way. They always interpret it differently.
That's
So
that's an excellent point in terms of communications.
exactly, yeah. Communications is the big thing. Continuous communications is the big thing. And getting people, as was mentioned earlier, to kind of not depend on social media for their translations of what's going on in the world is going to be a big way forward.
But in communication, I mean, you can communicate emotion, hate,
Yep,
fear,
yep,
personalizing your arguments, or you can present facts as they may relate to policies. And it does seem to be, in the world of communications today, there's an awful lot of hate, fear, misinformation without regard to facts and logic. And somehow they get away with it. We seem to have a different value set that the more eyeballs you get, the happier we will be, and an eyeball equates maybe to a vote. That seems to be what's going on right now. Is market forces want eyeballs, and you'll get eyeballs with the more extreme presentations. It doesn't matter whether it's factual or not. Go ahead, Dawn. I know you're jotting notes here, so you're getting ready.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this. I'd like to add that when I look around the world, I see people as having a scarcity mindset or an abundant mindset. And those with a scarcity mindset are big into win, lose, they never have enough. They're always seeking more, right? And those with an abundant mindset are collaborating, they're sharing, they're, giving back to the community. And I think to myself, in our society, I think we might be wise to put those with an abundant mindset on a bit of a pedestal and celebrate them. Because I think over time, we've had a tendency to celebrate those in the other category. Just because people have nice clothes and a fancy car and have made a lot of money and they're king of the castle in terms of a big corporation or fancy title, doesn't entitle them to be there. And I don't think they've got I think it's a healthier mindset that we're looking for. And I think we have to do a little bit of a paradigm shift here in terms of what we celebrate in our society. And I'm all for, putting down the technology and getting back to social occasions like this and talking to other people and traditional values and kind of getting back to basics in a lot of ways. That sense of community and looking after one another,
Again, that's leadership. I mean, one of the things I think we're seeing in the U.S., which is why I think you're going to see a landslide. I mean, it's astounding to see how close things are right now, but that's polls, that's not voters. I believe the point that you're making is going to resurrect itself, and that you will see democracy works, that people want to see a more moderate, calmer, more logical society. And that we will see that the extremes are going to be muted and find themselves on the wrong end of the stick in this test that we're going to see in this next election, because it is a test. Does hate sell? I mean, what you're seeing in Venezuela right now, and what you're seeing over and over again, where elections are then challenged, which is what we saw in January 6th, even though it's denied that was violent. And is saying, well, we had a peaceful transitions on January 20th, but leading up to that, it was not particularly peaceful. So I'm not sure that the argument that it was a peaceful transition holds. But we are seeing a challenge to democracy, and the very essence of what democracy is: one person, one vote, and the election is the ultimate decision maker. That is the court of the. There is challenges going on of the core elements of democracy right now on a world scale. Yeah. And if we could get leadership that could help people say, look at what you want in a civil society is you want civil discourse. I mean, even in Parliament, you have the negatives and you have the status quo. So we have government instruments that tend to foment, and that's what law. You ask a lawyer, you ask two lawyers in the room, they want to win at all costs. Go ahead, Tom. You're not going to get the last say. I guess Shirley gets the last say again. Tom, you want to add anything here?
I want to go back to this business of the guns in the States and how threatening all of that is and everything like that. And I grew up on a farm. We had 3 guns. We had a big gun for killing animals and shotgun of 22. Anyway, my mom stayed on this farm till she could no longer look after herself. And I went to visit her this one day, and I said, Mom, where's the 22? She had the 22 under her bed. And she said, oh, I gave it to your brother. I don't really need it. I said, Mom, there's these really wicked people out there, and even older women, they'll do all sorts of nasty things. And it's easy to break into this house. And she says, Tom, if that happens, I won't let him out for a week. So
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. We got an element of humor here because one of the things I said in the article is we seem to have lost humor and it's been displaced by hate. But Shirley, go ahead.
Well, I was going to agree with what Dawn said. I think we need to get back to caring for people and treating people fairly. When we look at the haves and the have-nots situation and how that is growing, the amount of homeless people, but also the amount of billionaires. And I question myself, why do people admire these celebrities so much and think that they're their best friend when they don't even know them? Whether it's sports athletes or whether it's actors or any kind of celebrities, and then they start to get involved in politics and, you know, try to tell people what to do. And I think we have to start valuing ordinary people. Every time I go in a LRT station and see a custodian cleaning up the filth there, I would go and say thank you. Those people are important, and I don't know, this social situation now with Facebook and Instagram and all those and the influencers, it's just, you know, it's just out of control. And I would just like to, and I appreciate meeting today, as was mentioned, and having discussions one-on-one and getting outside and, you know, getting away from the technology once in a while and actually being with people.
As a wrap up, I'll say a few words and then we'll call it a day. I just came back from a trip to the US and I'm going to write a brief article of a glimpse of America. And when I met with the individuals, I found what we talk about. I found people who respect one another. I found a commitment to community. I found inclusiveness and welcome. But what I was hearing on the media from the quote, the leaders was the opposite. So it seems to me that core to a democratic society and a civil society is that individuals coming out of high schools, coming out of families, typically have had and probably still do have a sense of respect, a sense of responsibility, a sense of working one another, some elements of compassion and empathy. But something's happening at the institutional level where winning has become so important that they are overriding the will of the people to have a civil society. So I point my finger at leadership. And a point I think Shirley and a number of you have made is, and I'm going to read from this, this is not to say that all hope is lost. We need not be passive lemmings, just letting it go on, or violent activists to say this is so important, like Vance says, is we can lie because it's so important to have a discussion. I'm not sure lying isn't a sign of a violent activist promoting violence and saying, oh, this is, you got to be fearful and hateful because we need to have a broad discussion. But we cannot continue down this path without facing serious consequences. Something has to change, starting with acknowledging at the leadership level that our current systems, while not working, and we may need new ideas, we may need new strategies, but if we don't need something new, we need a renewal of the commitment to building a genuine civil society. That's what we need to hear the leaders promoting. And when I hear someone say, maybe joy has a place in the political rhetoric. We need a society where violence isn't the default response to conflict or to losing, and where empathy and respect are valued personally and publicly as much as success and power. The time for reckoning is now. If we don't act soon, we risk losing not just the battle against violence, but the very essence of what it means to be civil. And that's a war we cannot afford to lose. And I think this message is for Canada, not just for the US. The US wears democracy on its sleeve. What goes on in the US is heard on a world scale. What goes on in Canada echoes on our mountains, but that's about it. Watching what's happening in the US will be instrumental. I am optimistic that there will be leadership realizing that enough is enough. Thank all of you. I've enjoyed today immensely, both topics.
It's fun.
Barry, I attribute this anger and whatnot to materialism. You know, our society is becoming more and more materialistic. You look at the TV, and the TV is a driver, of course. You know, there's all these great trucks you can buy, and then you're going to find happiness, and happiness is going to make you whole, and so on and so on. So it's just materialistic emphasis in our society now that I think is causing a lot of our pain.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, materialism is probably what we discuss when we discuss the imbalance between the rich and the poor. I'm not so sure being poor necessarily leads to violence. And in fact, the most violent people are those with the highest education and among those that have prospects of wealth.
Well, the pressure for them is to succeed, so they.
But if that was the case, then you would see the violence coming from the poor, and that's not who led communism under Lenin. It was the wealthy and the elite and the educated that became the drivers. They wanted to see change, and they were resorting to violence, not the poor.
Yeah.
So I like a good discussion, and I'm not going to be hateful saying I win this argument, and I'll be violent if you don't agree with me. But I do think that one needs to think beyond the schism that exists between the poor and the rich as the basis of violence. I think it's something else, and I think it's power. I think, and this leads you to leaders, and those at the top are the ones that are perpetrating violence, not at the bottom, other than the gun holders in Chicago. I mean, that the 900,000 that died and have died in the United States over the last 20 years, since terrorism became a big issue. Only 3,400 they attribute to terrorism, and 900,000 to violence with a gun. Yes, that is individuals expressing violence with a gun. That may be another form of violence versus the violence that we see at the political level. But violence in general does seem to be too prevalent as a means for resolving a power imbalance. And the power imbalance isn't about money alone. It's power per se. Okay, I'll leave it at that.